Okay, good to go.
Good evening and welcome to this our first meeting of Local Government and Reorganisation. This is a meeting of the Council which is being held remotely. The meeting is being recorded and streamed via YouTube where members of the public are able to watch the meeting. The recording will be available on the Council's website following the meeting. Please note that any comments posted on the chat feed of the Council's YouTube page during the recording of the meeting will not be monitored by the Council. All members have been provided with the remote committee guidance note prior to the meeting. Please can this be adhered to during the remote meeting. Points include all mobile devices should be switched off or set to silent so that the meeting is not interrupted by ringtones. Please switch your profile to mute unless you are speaking. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand in order that I'm aware that you wish to speak. For each item, officers will present the report and then the committee will discuss it. After which, if there are any group leaders or deputy leaders present, they will be asked if they have any comments to make. Thank you. Okay, sorry, I had a little bit of trouble getting back to the right screen. With that, we'll start with item agenda 1, please.
Madam Chairman.
Yes.
Declarations of interest.
Yes.
We've got apologies first, Councillor. I was just going to say there's no apologies because all members are here.
Thank you. Declarations of interest, please.
I'm an Essex County Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Headley.
Same declaration. I'm a elected member at Essex.
Thank you. Any other members with declarations of interest? With that, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, please. Paul, I think you're on mute.
You think correctly, Chairman. I was. Hopefully not now. Yeah, sorry. So I think the main item, the only item on the agenda is to provide an update for members. I think this committee, its first meeting, one of the main purposes of it is to enable us to update members on how things are developing and do that in a public forum. So a useful opportunity to do that. And so that's what I will seek to do. I'll just share my screen if I may, and then just take members through. Yeah, so in the presentation, we did provide an update to Policy and Resources Committee, I think on the 16th of September. Few early slides in this replicate that. So apologies to, I think, Councillor Headley and yourself, Chairman, who were present there, but hopefully you'll be happy to see those again. And I just want to kind of take us back really a few months and just provide the background to where this has come from, the journey over the last few months and where we are now. It's come quickly, it's evolved quickly and changed quickly, and that's still continuing now. So a really good opportunity to update members. I'll go through the presentation and then hopefully that will form the basis of any questions and discussion at the end. And I just want to go back really because as members will be aware, the Council does have an ambition around seeking to attain unitary status that was reflected in a report to the Policy and Resources Committee back in January early this year. And it was agreed to progress work towards Basildon seeking to attain unitary status. I think it was evident within that report and presented to members that a key barrier to achieving unitary status was size. So the government's position at that time was that it would look for unitary authorities to have a between 300 to 500,000 population. And obviously we fall short of that. But there was felt to be other opportunities and therefore it was agreed to progress. So our desire around unitary and what local government reform, and I'll come on to, is talking about, has been there for some time. But just in terms of our own position, it was agreed at Policy and Resources Committee on the 16th not to progress that further. So a recognition further to expectations around the white paper and further government announcements that seeking to attain unitary status for Basildon only at this time was not felt to be beneficial to progress, and therefore that is not being progressed. So there was a change of policy position just a few weeks ago. And I think our position around combined authority, which is another issue that I'll come on to in terms of devolution and local government reform, was that we have contributed to, and Policy and Resources Committee again formally noted the work of the Association of South Essex Local Authorities, ASELA's work, which we are part of, and the representations which it made to government, which were exploring a combined authority for South Essex. So certainly no firm proposal, but a review of governance had been undertaken, and a prospectus setting out the ambition for South Essex was developed. So we've been in this space of devolution and local government reform for some time, I think it's fair to say. And therefore, when the announcements around the white paper came, we were perhaps a bit ahead of the curve on some of this. But in terms of devolution and local government reform, members will be aware around the combined authorities that have been established, I think of which there's 10, which have been regarded as successful on many fronts by the government. And therefore there was a move towards reaffirming its commitment. And I think the expectation of the white paper, which has been in the offing for quite some time, was that it would reaffirm its commitment to combined authorities and probably reaffirm its commitment to directly elected mayors as well. But a number of announcements that were made suggested that it would go further than that, and that there would be a link between seeking a combined authority, directly elected mayor, and the powers and funding that would come with that from government. Two areas would need to be accompanied by local government reorganisation, and particularly a move from two-tier to unitary authorities in order to simplify the structures. And I think part of that is probably a rationale that the government perhaps didn't want to create an additional layer. So if we have a two-tier system now and a combined, arguably there's 3, combined and a unitary, we're just down to 2. So I think there was some rationality in that. And other reasons, obviously various reasons around not only the success, but the financial challenges which are being faced in the public sector and in local authorities. So numerous drives really towards the intentions around the white paper. And there was also announcements that there was going to be references in the white paper to parish and town councils and the devolution of powers to them, and how if an area is covered by larger authorities, that would become more important because of the potential broader coverage of an authority. And so that was announcements that came around June, July time, and that was in advance of the expectation that the government was expected to set out proposals in that white paper in the autumn. And that has been a lot of noises since then, and a recent change in position that I'll come on to. But that's the background and where we were, and the announcements that were being made, and the context within which work was progressed just a few months ago. I have circulated to Policy and Resources Committee members, so they're in the public domain, but Julie helpfully circulated them to you yesterday. Just a suite of letters really, which set out some of what I've just covered around ASELA's representations, around a combined authority for South Essex, around the letter from Simon Clarke to the leader of Essex County Council, which I think prompted the work that they commissioned and are undertaking, which I'll come on to. And further letters from ASELA and between ASELA and the minister at that time, Simon Clarke, who members I think will be aware has resigned recently, just around ASELA and the work that was being undertaken. So I thought it was useful to share them with members of this new committee, just so you had that broader context that was there. The Essex County Council, there was an initial leaders summit convened by the County Council that was held on the 31st of July, and all leaders across Essex, including our leader, were invited and I think were present. And subsequent meetings have been held since. And that was really to inform leaders that in response to the announcements that I've just talked about with regards to the white paper, the County Council had commissioned PricewaterhouseCoopers to undertake a review and develop options for local government reorganisation across the whole county of Essex. That was received difficultly by a number of authorities, and partly that was because it wasn't jointly commissioned by all councils. And obviously the issue around a piece of work that's affecting those authorities, a strong feeling that that should have been jointly commissioned. There was a preference from county that there was a combined authority covering Greater Essex, which contradicted or conflicted with the Acela proposition for a combined authority in South Essex, and a stated position of between 2 and 4 councils in Essex. And I think the lower number caused some concerns to many members who felt that authorities approaching 1 million population were simply too big and would not be effective. So there was a number of issues that were areas of concern. I think, as I've said at the bottom there, it's fair to say that since then, a more collaborative approach has emerged, and I'll come on to that shortly. But that work was commissioned and was underway, and I'll come on to the current position around that. And the issue as well in that summit was the announcement that they wished to be in the first tranche of reorganisation. And if we look at what that first tranche meant, that's the first tranche across the country. So getting into government with a proposal quickly. The indicative timeline was as set out then. And as you can see, new authorities potentially up and running in less than 3 years' time. So there was that was a very challenging timescale and brought the issue really to the fore. And I think a recognition from authorities that they needed to respond. And that was different across the county. So some authorities, I think, had a position where they were preferred to wait for the white paper, see what that said, and then respond and react to that. But a number of councils, I think, certainly including ourselves, felt that it was important to act now, particularly as that work had been commissioned by the county council and that there was a desire to be in the first tranche. So the gun had been fired really, and we needed to react to that. I think it is fair and correct to say, I think the position of the leader of Basildon Council has been that the preferred position would be one submission across Essex that in essence the majority supported, and it was therefore something which the whole of Essex could put forward, recognising that that's incredibly difficult, but clearly that is the best position and one in which government would be most likely to respond positively to. And I think that's also on the basis that the leaders of, I wouldn't say that, with definitively, but all authorities recognise that reorganisation would perhaps be beneficial for Essex and a move to a unitary structure. So there was a desire for and a recognition of the benefits, and it was therefore about how that could be done most effectively across Essex. But in light of the work by county council not being jointly commissioned, and the speed in which things were moving, there was a number of authorities, including ourselves, and that has grown to, I think, the majority of the city district and borough councils, to commission a separate piece of work alongside that was commissioned by Essex County Council. I think the desire to submit jointly remained, but I think there was a recognition that if we were not able to collaborate as effectively as we would like with the county council, or the options which were preferred by the council conflicted with our own and that of other authorities, then as members I'm sure would appreciate, it was important for us to take an informed view in order that we could act accordingly. And that piece of work is being led by Chelmsford City Council. It's ongoing. And there was kind of hopefully, and as this collaboration, a more collaborative approach emerged, there was a data sharing agreement and recognition that both PricewaterhouseCoopers and Grant Thornton and the authorities who had commissioned them held data and required data to inform that work. So there was an informal data sharing agreement in order that all parties have access to the same data, which I think was a helpful move forward. That is hosted by Castle Point Council. All authorities have been asked to provide a range of data, and that's been coordinated through the Essex Finance Officers Network, and Owen's on the call and on the meeting and can provide further information and respond to members' questions perhaps around that. We've now responded and supplied all the requested data, but I'll come on to the position of some other authorities when I provide an update shortly. I think in terms of the two pieces of work at different levels, but the main output of them and the piece of work is really analysis of the options for local government reorganisation. What are the different options, and perhaps what would be the best options, having regard to a number of factors: sustainability, deliverability, links to community, financial elements, etc. And again, Owen will probably be able to talk a bit more about some of the data that's been provided. So there was two pieces of work ongoing, and against that indicative timeline, and both pieces of work I think due to conclude around October, ready for a submission by the end of the year in light of that indicative timeline. And that was the position, I think, even back at Policy and Resources Committee on the 16th of September. But very shortly after that, there was noises started to emerge that the white paper was to be deferred. That has moved from the end of the year to certainly in 2021. And there was also noises as well, and that was to be different and perhaps not as definitive as what I'd set out in terms of the key issues. So there was always the question about how far would government go in requiring, how much consensus would be sought within a local area. And there was suggested to be I use the term, a watering down of that. And then it develops, and there was develops even further just this week. You can see the announcement there, or a statement by Robert Jenrick, the Secretary of State, in which he has kind of firmly, I think, put the brakes on that piece of work. As I said, shortly after the 16th of September and the report we made to Policy and Resources Committee, there was noises, and certainly I think the County Council had an awareness that it was likely to be delayed, and therefore they convened a further leaders summit on the 2nd of October. And the key issues I think agreed there was that there was an agreement across all, including the County Council, their piece of work with Pricewaterhouse, and the work commissioned by other local authorities through Grant Thornton, to adopt a more measured pace. There was a number of workshops planned of chief executives of different work streams by both Pricewaterhouse and Grant Thornton. They have been cancelled, which gives a sense of that adopting a more measured pace. And I've referenced the term, but I think there's a recognition as well from leaders that whilst they agreed to adopt a more measured pace, there's subsequent recognition that that needs to be clarified. So I don't think myself or Scott or any others can really say what that means and what the timeline might look like. And I think that would have been difficult for leaders to set at that time, because I think they need to see how the sands shift over the next few weeks ahead of their further summit, which I'll touch upon at the moment. There was also, I think, a key issue agreed that leaders wished to have increased ownership and direction. So it had moved at a very fast pace, and I think therefore chief executives had to respond quickly and act proactively to some of them developments. And in adopting a more measured pace, I think leaders therefore wish to really get a grip on it and take that ownership. And they also wish to see enhanced governance, project management arrangements around this piece of work. So those were some of the key issues. But I also think there was, again, at that summit, a further developing collaboration between all authorities, including the County Council. Scott might want to say something at the end just around that, but certainly we have seen a shift around that. And I think there's a recognition from all parties that one submission on behalf of Essex is the most appropriate and would be the most beneficial if that was what the majority desired. And therefore we should be able to work collaboratively. I think there's if I'm honest, the initial commissioning of the work by the County Council has made that collaboration at the outset a little difficult, but as I say, there seems to be a further developing collaboration, and hopefully that will continue, and there'll be a more amenable environment to that through that more measured pace, which I just referenced. So we kind of, even the last few weeks, that's moved, and there's been a slowing down. I think in terms of the data, we provide all our data, but I think some authorities now are, struggling to resource the provision and the support around this work. But so there's a point around that, and obviously the work can only go as quickly as the data, etc., is provided. The commissions, certainly from Grant Thornton, which we're more familiar with, they have slowed their work down. They're not now doing financial analysis. They're waiting for direction from leaders at their further summit in November. So they'll do a bit of work, but they're certainly not waiting to conclude and are waiting for direction from leaders at that time. The next Leaders Summit is in November. I think the date's to be confirmed, and the outline of that agenda is to consider the future timeframe. So I think, as I said earlier, some clarity as to what a more measured pace means. I think demonstrating that enhanced collaboration, there'll be presentations to all leaders from both Price Waterhouse and Grant Thornton on their work, what they've been asked to do, and I think that's really helpful in terms of bringing that openness and transparency to all. So that's another helpful step. And we continue to actively engage in both pieces of work. So as I say, our position, or the leaders' position today, has been that ideally we would like to see one submission for the county, and therefore it's right and proper that we engage with the county council work, and we've provided the data, etc., that's required of that. But in light of the early stages of collaboration, which were not as we would perhaps have hoped them to have been, we also need to carry on with our own work, and that will continue. I think it's worth just important to the work we've commissioned jointly, just for members' information, I think our contribution to that was circa £6,000. So a useful, I think, use of money in terms of informing this significant issue. And I think, as I said at the outset, I think this committee is a great opportunity for us to update members across all groups, and for other members to observe in an open and transparent environment. And we have, I think, meetings scheduled monthly, certainly till the end of the year, to enable us to do that promptly. The next meeting is the 11th of November, and I'll hopefully be in a position to update you following the Leaders Summit. Just a nod that we might need to suggest to the Chamber revise that date. Clearly, if the Leaders Summit is on the 12th, we may not want to meet the night before, and may wish to put that back so we can provide you with an update. But I think hopefully the presentation just touches upon the how things have moved over the last few months from an initial huge surge in the work in response to that, the changes around the white paper, and the recent announcements that are still filtering through this week around the delays, and how the work within the County of Essex has responded to that and is slowed down a little. I think just to conclude, to bring the members' attention at Policy and Resources Committee on the 16th of September, there were some principles for local government reform adopted, and they were, I think, there to, or the purpose of them was to give some guide to the leader in terms of his representation of the council's interests, and so I think being guided by them. Those are in the report to Policy and Resources Committee of the 16th. Hopefully some of them make sense. They were developed by Joe Ray, who is on the call, so I'm sure he's happy to talk about some of them further as well. But that's all I wanted to present this evening, Chairman, in terms of giving members of this new committee an update on hopefully brought you up to speed on the issue. A lot has gone on below that, which Scott will no doubt testify to, as well as greying hairs. But hopefully that gives members a good overview, and obviously officers are here and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Paul, for that overview. I'd like to open it up to members and ask if we have any questions. Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you. I think, it is the case that local government reform is coming. It's not an if, it is a when, and trying to get the best deal for Basildon is definitely the way forward. The South Essex Combined Authority, I think one of the reasons it fell was because I think it wasn't actually ambitious enough. I've read through the letters, and I think there's a lot more that could have been stated to push that forward. Not as a combined authority, but potentially as an actual unitary, because that's what the local government reform is pushing for. It could have mentioned the size of the South Essex economy, for example, because on population size, why the government wasn't looking at, didn't think it is a particularly good area, but if we focus on how big the South Essex economy is, you may have persuaded government to go forward with that method. And also looking at infrastructure reform. One that we all know that the A127 is a big issue locally, especially that roundabout. And if you'd said, okay, this is a great opportunity to get the A17 moving, deliver for the British economy, it could have been a much more helpful thing to push the government, and they may have been persuaded. I do welcome the push to have an Essex-wide approach for looking at what's coming forward. I think allowing Essex County Council to just lead on their own would have been the wrong approach. I don't think they've delivered particularly well for Basildon. I think they focus their resources more in the north of Essex, and I welcome that other authorities in the south could have a much more say going forward. I think if it had been left to Essex County Council, they would have tried to preserve as much of the status quo as possible. One thing you always hear from them, for example, is that Basildon can't afford the adult social care. Yeah, I did an FOI a couple of years ago, and the spend was just under 57 million. Now, compared to that to, say, Rochford, which has 22 million, it sounds quite high. But Basildon has 12.6% of the population and has 12.7% of the spending. Now, if you compare that to, say, Tendering, for example, they get 13.5% of the spend and 9.9% of the population. And I think the highest is probably Colchester, which has 15.7% of the spend for only 13% of the population. So I think we should dispel the myth that Basildon's going to be too expensive for adult social care. One thing I think concern for our local neighbours in terms of becoming a combined unitary authority is probably the debt level of Basildon Council. And I think that's something that the administration and the council widely needs to look at and try and reassure anyone that's potentially we're going to merge with going forward that it is sustainable and there is a plan to pay it off. But yeah, I think local government reform is well overdue, and I'm hoping that going forward we can all come up with something that suits everybody and get something that delivers for Basildon, allows us to grow our economy and get better infrastructure. Thank you.
It's quite refreshing to hear one of our Conservative councillors speak so positively about unitary after the other comments we usually receive. I just want to bring Owen in at that point, if that's okay, just to come back on some of the financial points that Luke's raised. Thank you.
I think there's a few points probably to make to set out. Is it worth me just recapping where we are with the financial analysis, just so members up to speed of where that's got to and where we are?
Yeah, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so there's been obviously the first exercise was responding to the PwC commission that Paul referred to that county had led, and there's two main parts of that. One is members may be aware that obviously county they don't or haven't historically managed their finances by a district by district basis. It's done in localities, but not that mirrors district council borders. So there's quite a big bit of work for Essex County Council to disaggregate their budget, so you can actually see, how much they spend in different areas, and that's the first time they've sort of been able to do that. So it's a big bit of work that's been undertaken. And the second bit was to really pull all the financial and the funding information together from across the county. So what we've done, we've looked at a return we all sort of do every year based on our budgets, and that's all been pulled together in some templates. So we've got that clear financial modelling of what is spent where, and then on the back of that data you can then look at the different combinations of authorities for unitary status, how they may fit together, what that financial basis looks like. So all that has been sort of pulled together, but work is still going on to actually understand that, make sure it's realistic, and basically do some quality checks on that data. And a key part of that is looking at obviously the funding side as well. And obviously the funding, it's a really difficult area to look at, because as we all know, the way councils are funding is going to change. It's been sort of on the cards for a long time. So that's another sort of unknown about it. And funding, it's generally the funding follows the need to a certain extent. That's why the formula should work, give or take, how it actually works in practice. So again, that's another key thing we're looking to try and unwind and unpick. So the second major bit of work has been around the Grant Thornton Commission, and some additional information that they've required to try and obviously do that second piece of work. That's on hold at the moment, but again, there's been templates issued that we've completed that actually sets out some different information to help inform that, and that includes additional information on things like FTEs, what shared services we have, sort of council tax-based growth, again trying to look at a little bit more at the future as well. And as part of what we've also been doing is looking at where we've got challenges and budget gaps, again just to look at where some of those financial issues and concerns are, so we can look at how we are structured going forward over the short term as well to medium term as well. And that's sort of the work that's been going on over the last, not that long really, sort of 4 to 6 weeks really, in quite a very short process. But as Paul sort of indicated, the grant Thornton work is on hold, and we're going for that due diligence work on the PwC modelling at the moment.
Thank you. Luke, does that answer some of your concerns that you just had? Is there anything else that you wanted to comment?
One more question. Because you said work had been held up and some authorities want to slow down the pace. Has more work taken place with our neighbours that we could potentially be merging with if the government pushes this forward?
Just a couple
Paul,
of
do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I'll come back. I mean, I think just firstly on the point around Acela, I think with the Acela did submit a prospectus to government, and that was alluded to in a report back to Policy and Resources from Acela back in July. Apology, it might be worth me just circulating that to Councillor Mackenzie and the other members of the committee, because I think that did some of what you've just spoken about, or you asked about earlier, in terms of making the case for South Essex, particularly in terms of its economy. And why, and I think Acela, in fairness, as most would recognise, that many other combined authorities are bigger than the South Essex area, but Acela believes that, strongly believes that the economic and the unique economic nature of South Essex in its proximity, etc., makes it viable for a combined authority. So I will share that prospectus with you. I think there's the final point around authorities that are struggling. I think that it is resource. I think credit to Owen and his team and others that have provided data and made sure that this council's been able to respond. But I'm sure Owen will reiterate that it has been quite a lot of work. So it's not unreasonable for a number of authorities to have difficulties in doing that, and particularly when the timescales have gone back a little. I think in terms of our looking at mergers that we may have with others, that's not work that's progressed since the slowing down of the pace. But as I say, some of them announcements have literally happened in the last couple of weeks, and perhaps it will be for the council to consider its own position and if or whether it wishes to undertake any work. I think as the sands are shifting, they'll probably let them shift a little more. We'll have the leaders summit and probably assess our position and whether we wish to do any work, but there's no data analysis being undertaken at this time in light of the deferred Grant Thornton work.
Thank you.
Any other councillors wishing to ask questions at this time? Councillor Smith, and then I'll
I think,
bring
Madam
Councillor
Chair,
Headley.
Councillor Headley was first off the draw.
Apologies, I didn't see that. Yeah, Councillor Headley, do you want to come in first? That's perfectly acceptable.
Only on a small point, and thank you for the opportunity, Chair. I'm not sure that the people on this meeting will be fully aware of the motion that was passed at Essex County Council's full council meeting on Tuesday of this week. So with your indulgence, if you allow me to read the motion that was passed, it may help the discussion as we progress through this meeting. The motion reads and was agreed is as follows: this council, that's Essex, will continue to work with all local authorities and the public to determine the most appropriate structure for local government in Essex where legislation permits. The council confirms that when the white paper on LGR is published, it will conform to the requirements as specified, and particularly where there is a requirement for public consultation and recognition of unique local conditions. The debate that took place emphasised that this was probably not the right time in advance of the white paper being published to discuss in detail any work that may need to be done in the future. And the received wisdom, rightly or wrongly, is that that white paper will not be produced this side of spring 2021. So I think whilst I would encourage, as a Basildon councillor, we do the most we can for the residents of Basildon, I think it's important that, particularly given the challenges we have in the present pandemic, that we don't essentially waste officers' time when they have so much more urgent work to do in the borough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Headley. I'd just like to come over to Councillor Smith now. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll just pick up one point Councillor Headley mentioned through the chair. It's hard to disagree with much of that, but I think with our present finances, when the government looks at these new unitary authorities and going down to one-tier government, the government chancellor might have no other option but to encourage this to be pushed forward as quickly as possible to save government money at a time of financial real difficulty. What I wanted to bring up about was there are some things I think this committee needs to do. Obviously, some babies we don't want to throw out the bathwater, but the Essex Pension Fund, Thurrock and Southend, both unitaries, their employees paying to it. I understand it's very good. I mean, myself and Councillor Medley at Full Council on Tuesday heard about the Essex Pension Board getting through these difficult times. They've done fairly well. So obviously, I would imagine it would still exist in this new unitary world. But I think it would be useful for members of this council to understand a bit more and possibly have a meeting on that particular subject, because it's fairly important. I think we need to understand that. It's a really good thing. It helps our employees, the Peter Dustman or Scott Logan sat there. It's what the Essex Pension Fund is there for. So I think we need to pick up on that. There is, of course, the local highways panels. The principle about it, no matter whether you're in administration or in an opposition, you can put forward a highway scheme to promote safety or some other measure to encourage walking. As a county councillor, you can do. Now, if we have these new unitaries, we've always had this long-standing thing in Basildon. If you're in administration, it's easier to access member investment. And if you're in opposition, it's almost impossible. That's gone on for time immemorial. Well, if we become this new unitary authority, however it looks, whether we're Thurrock, Brentford, whoever, I think we need to have, obviously, a continuation of the local highways panel and learn from the long-standing mistakes, namely the contractor names and chooses the prices and what can and can't be done. I think we'd have to be flexible and possibly spend a meeting to talk about that. That's fairly important, because whether, say, for example, I want a park bench in Nethermain, that's not highway safety. But if, say, Councillor Mackenzie wants a zebra crossing in Pitsea South East, even though he's in opposition, or say on this new unitary authority, you should be able to bring that to a committee to be looked at. Because obviously all members, regardless of party political consideration, would want to improve road safety in this new unitary authority world. And I think I'll leave it there, because we can always come back and talk about more, because I just look at the creation of these new unitaries as lots of mini Brexits across the country. And I think it's important to have this committee to make sure when we all break apart, we keep what's good and improve what's bad. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Local democracy is obviously very important. Councillor David Burton-Sampson, I think you indicated next.
Yes, Chair. Councillor Schrader was before me, but I'm happy to give way to him first.
Sorry, it's difficult to see the whole screen. I can only see four of you at once.
I defer to his worship, the mayor. He started so.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and thank you, Chair, and thank you, Paul, for that insightful presentation as well. You know, I guess the good thing is we are ahead of the game here in a number of ways with this whole local government reform, both with the work we've done with the cellar, and our own desire as a council to move away from Essex and to form ourselves as a unitary. So, you know, a lot of thought has been put into this, a lot of work has already gone into it, certainly from the Acela point of view, and work had started from the unitary point of view with Basildon. I do think it was a foolish time for the government to launch their thoughts on the white paper and put out those timeframes that caused many local authorities and leaders and officers to be thrown into a tiz trying to work towards what was potentially going to be these deadlines in the middle of a pandemic. So that was, I think, regrettable, and I'm glad that the pressure has been eased a little bit in terms of that piece of work being done. That said, however, I think we do need to stay ahead of the game because, as I think it was Councillor Mackenzie said, this is coming. This reform will happen, and whatever we want, it's going to happen. So we need to be ahead of the game, and I think we need to start as a committee. I think our work is actually really important between now and the spring, as we start to think how we forward our preparations for when that does come. So, you know, what we need to understand more what our place in a unitary. I just muted myself, apologies for that. We need to understand more what our place in the unitary may look like. We need to explore who those partners may be. We need to understand more about what our responsibilities may be and how that may be structured as a unitary. And as Councillor Smith said, we need to understand the good that we can bring forward and the bad that we can restructure into something that's going to be positive for our residents in the borough as we move forward. I just think we've got to get this right. We can't do this, you know, at speed. It's got to be a considered, measured piece of work, and that's why it's good that we are already ahead of the game and we're continuing to try and get ahead of the game. We owe this to our residents to get this restructure right, so that it's the right thing for the residents of Basildon Borough, and it delivers for them the right level of local government. So I'm keen to see how we can develop the work programme or the reports that come to this meeting as we move forward into the spring to make sure that we are doing the right things to be in the right position to get the best possible deal when that white paper does come forward. So yeah, that's all for now, Chair. I may come back in a bit later, but thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to bring back in Ms. Bergshaw, as you're indicating, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to come back on that, I think yeah, I'd agree with Councillor Burton-Sampson around that and the continuation of that work. I mean, I think the council is continuing its work because it has jointly commissioned Grant Thornton, one of the leading consultants, to do that analysis. And certainly I think one of the purposes of this committee is a forum upon which we can land that work. So we would certainly look to bring that back to you. And part of that is obviously an analysis of those options and all those issues that that Councillor Burton-Sampson has just mentioned. So I think it is important to recognise that we are part of a jointly commissioned piece of work, and we would look to bring that back to you. I think once perhaps I would just suggest it's clearly for the committee, but once we start to see then what some of the options are and the work that they're advising, that would be a good time to perhaps then think about the further work that we might need to do, depending on the different iterations and options that might be identified as part of that. So potentially at the meeting in November, we could bring some early indications of that work to try to get members, not just from the purpose of this update as to what is happening, but a bit more into that detail around what do the different options look like and what's the data and analysis and thinking telling us. So we'll certainly look to do that and bring that to you as soon as we can.
Chairman, you probably can't see me, Adele. I've been trying to come in to add to what Paul was saying a bit earlier. I don't know if you can indulge me in some of the so I can add.
Always.
Thank you. It's just really to pick up a couple of points that in response to the members' statements earlier, and going back to just started off with the first councillor in terms of what Luke McKenzie said. It's probably really important that he's right. And it was a statement that on a webinar this afternoon from Robert Jenrick. He was very, very clear this afternoon. You probably all have seen from press statements that they announced Cumbria, Yorkshire and Somerset were the three that were very advanced in the unitary conversations, and those will be moving forward as what they called the first tranche. What they then also went on to say that where other areas, which obviously included Essex, were less advanced, they felt that it was appropriate, as a number of members said, to concentrate on the current COVID crisis. And what he was very clear, there will be a right time to come back to this conversation. So I think that was probably very, very clear this afternoon about actually there will be the right time when we talk about this, because it is the belief that the transformation around some of these services is important to government, and particularly the finances that Owen mentioned earlier. Just on what Owen said around the work that he's doing on data capture, it's not just about money. The criteria that Grant Thornton were looking at was about improved services, which a couple of the councillors mentioned earlier, better community representation and empowerment. So that's really important for what Luke said there earlier around the South Essex, as example, is a population of nearly 900,000. That clearly would be the biggest unitary council and probably not represent the area appropriately. So they're the sort of things that we would come back to as this group for you to decide about the criteria. So it's not, so this is the purpose of the grant fund. What it would do is a really good data capture exercise. Although we've slowed down the finances for the right reasons, we hope that obviously the leaders on the summit, which we hope would be around the 10th or 11th of November, so we may have to move this meeting with your indulgence, we'll be able to give you a richer picture of all the options, because in the end it's about members will decide what's right for their place, the right configuration, and that's what hopefully the Grant Thornton work in particular will be able to do. So I just want to pick up a couple of those points up, and I agree with the motion that Councillor Headley mentioned around the white paper. This clearly will be a delay till next year, and we have no idea. It could be as late as the spring, but I still think most leaders were quite keen at the summit in October to still do the work, because there will be a right time for this. Actually, some of the data capture is helpful, and where Councillor Smith recognised this earlier was quite important about service improvements, because some of this data will look about how you can work smarter within the two-tier system, or work with your partners across South Essex or across the wider Essex. So there's a lot of opportunity to work on this together, and not to forget that this is also about looking at, and which I know this council is doing, looking at how that will impact on parish councils and parish areas as well. So not to forget that as part of this piece of work, which we're looking at as a council anyway. So I just wanted to add a few key points and feedback to some of the questions, Chairman.
Thank you. I mean, I fully appreciate, I'm just going to bring Councillor Schrader back in a second. I fully appreciate that the white paper has now been delayed. But what that does is it gives us time to do the work that we need to get done. Obviously, there is a lot of baseline work that needs to be done around demographics and what that looks like. And in terms of a sustainable council tax and what that would look like in order to provide the services that at the moment are provided by an upper tier. And so I think that we shouldn't think about this delay being a negative thing. It is coming, as Councillor Mackenzie said, at some point. And this now allows us to have those work streams in order to be prepared, because ultimately our ambition has not changed. Our ambition is still that either with a partner council or alone, we will be a unitary council. And therefore that work still needs to get done. I'm going to bring in Andy, if you'd like to come in, Councillor Schrader. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for my sudden disappearance. I'm not quite sure what happened there. I just got logged out for no apparent reason. That's the COVID reality that we're all living in, I guess. I want to thank Mr. Birkinshaw for his report, which was very interesting. I am very pleased to have been appointed to this new committee, though I mean, I do sort of still feel in my bones that it's a little bit jumping ahead in the absence of the white paper. I understand there is certain things that we would want to be getting on with, but I feel that the we probably could have done this in a working group, if I'm being completely honest. I think setting up a full-blown service committee, which comes with certain costs and resource, I think was a little bit maybe jumping the gun. But as I've said before in the council chamber back in the days when we used to set foot in there, that I personally am an agnostic on the subject of local government reform. Lots of councillors have different views on it, and I certainly make no assumptions about the personal inclinations of either of my colleagues. I think they will become clear as we progress. And certainly there are some who say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now, speaking for myself, I'm not entirely sure that it ain't broke. I am certainly by no means an undiluted admirer of the multi-layered model of local government, such as we enjoy here in Basildon. We've got Essex County Council responsible for highways, libraries, education, health, etc. And then you've got Basildon Borough Council responsible for housing, planning, waste, and some parts of the borough have parish councils and others don't. So it is arguably quite a muddled arrangement, and certainly all of us as local councillors, I'm sure, will be aware that residents find it very confusing and for the most part are totally oblivious to which council is responsible for what. So I, for one, am quite happy to keep an open mind on better arrangements for the way we structure things locally. But I have to say, I am firmly of the view that this should not by any means be regarded as an urgent priority at the present time. And I think the government's slowing down of this process does reflect that. I don't know how my colleagues feel, but it certainly feels like I think it would be perceived by our constituents as self-indulgent navel gazing at a time when we've got other things that we really need to be focusing on. And what I would say is that I am very cognizant of the Conservative manifesto that I campaigned on and my two colleagues campaigned on. It made a firm commitment to full devolution across England, modelled on the city region mayors, and I certainly look forward in the coming months to discussing and debating amongst ourselves the merits and demerits of the various models for local government that we could adopt. And I'll be very much guided by what serves the best interests of the people I have, for the present time at any rate, been elected to represent. So, if you'll indulge me, I would just make a couple of other observations. I am grateful to officers for forwarding members copies of the correspondence between the Association of South Essex Local Authorities and the then Minister. Obviously, he's since moved on, but the letters were interesting reading. Certainly, we are all well aware that the current administration favour a model of local government reform advanced by a seller that would essentially see the creation of a combined authority for South Essex. Now, while the minister was keen not to be too preemptive in addressing that aspiration, I don't think it can be ignored that he was significantly less than receptive. And I note in particular his comment in the letter to councillors Gledhill and Hossack that it is not clear to me on first sight that South Essex would be the right geography for such an arrangement. I think we need to be mindful of that. Another aspect of this is that I do want to address this line that's been sort of fed to us repeatedly, certainly by the leader of the council, which insinuates that this whole process is somehow, well, not just inevitable, but that it's a case of if we don't get on board with the model that he in particular is advocating, then the change will be imposed on us from on high. Now, I've been in receipt, as my two colleagues, I dare say, have been as well, in receipt of a dear colleague from the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, Mr. Jenrick, and he is clear that this reform is coming, certainly, but the government will not pursue a top-down restructuring. Their commitment to localism means that they want locally led proposals, and that has been the consistent approach of the Conservative Party since 2010, when we scrapped Labour's regional quangos. So, he talks about other ways of delivering reform. There are a number of ways in which local authorities could streamline and make savings, including joint working with other councils and partners. So, you know, I will keep an open mind, but I do want to put the administration on notice that I know you have a particular model that you are very keen to advance, but you have no mandate to impose changes to local government, and nor does a seller, which is an unaccountable body with which I have huge issues. And my priority throughout, purely and simply, will be the quality and responsiveness of the local services that my constituents rely on. And I will be led by those considerations. But above all, any system of local government must enjoy the support and consent of the community that it serves. And I won't support anything that the electorate have not been fully consulted upon. So I think that while I'm very keen to take an active participation in this process, we've got to have, I want to see much more engagement with the residents on what they think the local government that serves them should look like. And I hope that that is something that the committee will actively engage in. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I think the idea that we don't have a mandate is ludicrous. With administration, that gives us the mandate to explore the options. It is no secret that the Alliance are in favour of leaving Essex County Council. We do not feel in any way that Essex County Council have served our residents well. And I think that that is a feeling that is felt through across the borough, whichever town you happen to live in. And it is important that we do pursue and that we do prepare. And this idea that we can just sit around and wait until the Conservative government get their act together and decide when they're bringing this bill forward is ridiculous. We need the baseline work to be done. We need to understand the demographics of our borough, across the whole borough. We need to understand the cost base and the needs of those upper tier presently services that Essex County Council provide, and what sustainable tax base that any unitary, whether that's alone or with a partnership council, would ultimately need. And so this idea that we can just sit around and wait is, well, for the birds. At this time, I want to bring back in Scott. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to reassure Councillor Schrader, again, one of the important things, the criteria, which is the purpose of this committee is to bring back, is the understanding around better community representation, and to be very clear that if members of this committee and if this council was to move forward with any option of unitary or combined authorities, there would be a full consultation process. That is part of the process, to be clear. And obviously, as we move forward and give you further updates, we can then talk more about how that will work as we get to that stage. But the first stage is quite clearly to understand all of the options and the data behind those options before you then go out to the public. So yes, I can categorically assure you there will be a very big comprehensive consultation with residents at the right time.
Thank you. Councillor Smith, you're indicating?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's a question to officers, really, because I'm looking at a previous case of when there was last wholesale major local government reorganisation in Essex, and that was in 1965 when the metropolitan part of Essex was transferred from the county council into the new Greater London County Council, and then in the 80s it was abolished, and we are where we are. Now, with some of those changes, some parts were taken away from one authority to another, and it's got a reference to Basildon. So, for example, Hainault used to come under the old Dagenham district, and when Redbridge Council was formed, Hainault was taken away from Dagenham, and obviously the remainder of Dagenham was merged with Barking. Now, why is that relevant to Basildon? Say, for example, Runwell, which comes under Chelmsford presently, is merged with another council, which is, say, Chelmsford, Malden, and maybe Colchester, just picking out places. Is it possible if the people of Runwell so wished came in with us? Because you go around Runwell and you'd think it was Wickford if you wasn't a local. So my question is, can parts of another authority, such as communities such as Runwell, be bolted onto another?
Paul, did do you want to come in at that point? You'll need to unmute. Paul.
Sorry, I think the last major kind of reorganisation around the 90s, when I think was I think I looked into this previously, was it when Southend and Thurrock became unitaries, and Basildon was certainly in the list of those at that time, but kind of fell by the wayside as that review kind of ended. I think in terms of taking parts, I think it would be mergers of authorities. I'm just thinking around the work of the Local Government Boundary Commission and the reviews that it could take. But I'm not aware that would include reviews to extend the boundaries of existing borough councils, but happy to have a look and come back with a bit more detail on that to members of this committee and Councillor Smith.
To be rather rude, Madam Chairman, don't mind if I come back with a supplementary question?
No, of course not.
Lovely. What I understand is, Paul, with a lot of our borough boundaries of Basildon, they're based in old parishes. So when I look at Nevermain, there's the fobbing part that comes under Thurrock, and there is them 60-odd fobbing houses that came under the old Vange parish that are in Nevermain. Now, it's likely Thurrock and Basildon will be some sort of new council, but I'm thinking where we've got these odd parish boundaries, so obviously the Roundmill, Wickfords, maybe Stock, the odd bits around Billericay. It's just a point of reference, just to tidy up our boundaries, because obviously the dustmen go right to the end of some roads to pick up one authority's bin, and the rest of the roads in that street in Wickford, another authority picks the bins up. It's a bit crazy and certainly not ecological if you follow all this carbon business.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Do any other councillors at this time have questions for our officers? Councillor Headley.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Councillor Schrader had to say, but can I respectfully suggest that prior to the issuing of the white paper, that we have a clear timeline and structure of the elements of potential reorganisation that we could usefully look at. And with all due respect to Councillor Smith, local highways panels have very small budgets. You know, whether they exist in the new structure is quite immaterial at this particular juncture. The other thing I would suggest is that it is obvious from the correspondence that we've seen that they are looking at devolution to parish and town council level. Not the whole of Basildon is parished. So there could be some work that needs to be done on, is it feasible to parish the current unparished areas? And in respect to the last question that Councillor Smith asked, my understanding is that the government is not minded to change the boundaries of existing borough, city and district authorities. So unless they change their mind on that, that's unlikely to happen. So I think the other thing that we need to be taking note of is that in any collaboration with other authorities and the restructuring, currently what are there, 14 districts in the unitaries, each of them have civic centres or town halls. If we went to say 4 unitaries to pick a number, 10 of those premises would be redundant. It could be that in a collaborative move, if we joined with 2, 3 or 4 other districts, the planning could be done for Basildon in one of those other districts. It's not clear at the moment what the elected membership will look like. It may well be that there's currently something like 400 elected councillors in Essex. If you take the 2-tier, it's unlikely that there'd be more than 70. It's unlikely that there'd be more than 4 chief executives. It's unlikely that there'd be 4 planning managers. So I think we have to be prepared to divest ourselves of some of the powers we currently enjoy in Basildon, because some of those powers may be devolved to a larger authority, not necessarily based in Basildon.
I don't disagree with you, Councillor Headley, depending how ultimately this is structured. But what you have to be aware of is right now, Essex County Council's plan would be for all of those things to go to Essex County Council looking just like it does now, but being even further removed. I think as we move forward, getting worried about where a council hall might, or where councillors might meet, or how many councillors there are, could not be further removed away from what our residents care about. What they want to know is who are providing my services. Are those services the services that me and my family need, and do they meet the requirements of the people of Basildon? Obviously, under whatever obviously under whatever reorganisation we have, our residents would have local representation, and it will be for those councillors through their representation to ensure the services that our local residents receive are improved. Because let's face it, many of our county councillors have not done that job effectively for far too long. And many other councillors who have tried to have had their hands tied by our present Essex County Council.
Well, I obviously don't share that view.
I know you don't agree with that,
But
but that is a situation.
The point I'm trying to make, Chairman.
Excuse me, that is a situation that not only I believe, that majority of our residents believe, that presently they are not well served by Essex County Council. And moving forward, local government reorganisation gives us an opportunity to change that. Right, any other councillors wishing to speak? Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you. It's actually more of a question for you, Chair. Just going forward, just clarification, like what decisions will this committee be making? Will it be making the ultimate recommendation to council? What going forward? Will it be deciding which are the best options?
The role of this, obviously, though, that comes under P&R because that is policy. What the role of this committee is to look at what work streams we need moving forward. What do we want those work streams to look like? What are the things that our officers should be working on now in preparation for what is coming down the track? It is not to make a final recommendation. That is not our role. That is P&R's role. Paul, did you want to come in on that? Thank you.
No, I mean, not particularly. I think the issue around coming just around the staging of this and, you know, how these things materialise is certainly unclear. I think just a couple of comments I was going to make around the parishing point that Councillor Headley brought, and also the issue which he and Councillor Smith and others spoke about in terms of community representation at a lower level on a larger unitary. And one of the workshops which County Council were running as part of the PwC Commission was with monitoring officers, and actually those were the two issues that we looked at. The vast majority of other issues that you may think initially are matters for those authorities, and in fairness, the issue of different ways of engaging with community or members such as highways panels and lots of others, again, are issues for them. But the monitoring officers did a bit of work on that, and I'm sure that's something which you can share. I mean, the point is that all we can do is draw attention to what they are, and it will ultimately be for those authorities to, when they're established, to determine what they wish to do. And I think that's an important point as well around combined authorities, that, you know, combined authorities are made up of constituent members, the councils, and so until you've got them councils in place, they can't sign up to be a combined authority. So that's just an important point. But I think the issue of parishing, I think I'm right. I think I'm right, but I might be wrong. I think it's 51% of the county is parished, unparished, and we so that's an issue, and we did look at that, and I think there is the opportunity as part of local government reorganisation to parish the whole area as part of the structural reform order, but clearly that would be a very difficult thing to do politically and with the community. But I think just in terms of our own approach, we are obviously undertaking work at the moment to consider the merits and desires of the community as to whether they wish to see the whole of this borough parished. So that is a piece of ongoing work, and obviously we're in the middle of the Wickford consultation, but giving consideration to the areas in the new town as well. I think obviously the remit of this committee, I think in fairness, was probably exploring in detail many of those issues we've talked about when that initial timeline was there. So it could have been a submission in December and in a very different place and different considerations. But I think there is a point to which this committee would no doubt take a more measured pace in looking at some of those. I think there's a number of things we could bring for members to consider and think about, but there is a danger in jumping ahead a little too soon on some of this. But I think the Grant Thornton Commission and the PwC and how that evolves over the next couple of months. But it might be useful. We did a members session around combined authorities and LGR. It might be worth just doing a report or a presentation to members at the next meeting, just so we've got a clear understanding of combined authorities and where they exist and what type of functions they're doing, because that's a key element of this. So perhaps we could bring that and some of those other issues. In terms of the work programme, obviously members have made a number of comments, and it'd be useful, I'd suggest, for us to liaise with yourself, Chairman, around bringing a work programme to the next meeting of the committee for discussion. You know, we can consider what representations members have made this evening and their helpful suggestions, and take that away and have a discussion and bring back a future work programme for, as I say, for the next meeting. I think there is that further update, potentially a initial presentation of the Grant Thornton work, and perhaps a report or presentation on combined authorities and what they're looking like nationally across the country. But some really helpful points, and likewise the parish work, we can look at that and see where the parishing is across the area, and also the work that we are doing. So there's a number of issues, but I think, as I've said on this issue, the sands shift and they're shifting quite quickly, and so we probably need to just, I would suggest, have a little reflection upon that, but some helpful points made by members. I think going forward, in terms of a final decision, you know, it depends. If the county council were to put their own submission in, that's not really going to require anything from us. We may make our objections or representations or support, but if it's a mutual option that we're being asked to support, then yeah, probably through LGR into P&R and onto council ultimately would be the vehicle that we would take, but very some distance away now, particularly with that more measured pace that is being taken.
Thank you. One thing I would say is that we do, following on from what you've said this evening, Paul, do need to look at perhaps changing that date of our next meeting, because it would seem odd to meet the night before decisions were made the following night. So if I could ask if Julie would look into that for us and perhaps look to how we're going to be able to change that to later in November. Do any other councillors this evening have questions for our officers? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just picking up from what I said earlier on, and it's addressed to Paul Birkinshaw through the chair. Can we at any stage request the Local Government Boundary Commission to tidy up our boundaries, where you've got these, as I described earlier, between Runwell and Wickford, to pick out one?
I think, Chairman, that's a point which I will come back on, but a quick search on the phone suggested not. So there is a number of different reviews that the Local Government Boundary Commission do, but I don't think that's one that will pick up. So I'm happy to have a little look further outside the meeting, Councillor Smith, and come back to you on, firstly, whether the Boundary Commission do it, and if not, what the options are. I think, as Councillor Headley said, I don't think there's a desire. I think it would be difficult to do, but I think your question is probably a different one as to can it be done and how. So I'm happy to come back to members on that, do a bit of research.
Thank you. I think at this point that we've thanked Paul for the presentations given this evening for officers who have attended, and that the plan will now be for us to meet in November, probably not the date that you presently have in your calendar due to that leaders meeting that is taking place on the 11th. And I thank you for your contributions this evening. Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.